Alright, AP World Historians. Let's dive into Unit 7. Topic 4. The global economy between the world wars. This period, roughly from the 1920s to the late 1930s, is a roller coaster of economic highs and devastating lows. It's a story that reshaped governments, societies, and set the stage for the Second World War. So, picture this. World War I is over. The Roaring Twenties kick off, especially in the United States. There's this huge burst of industrial production. New technologies like the automobile, radio, and household appliances are flying off the assembly lines. For the first time, many people are buying on credit, fueling a massive consumer culture. The U.S. economy is booming, and since America had become the world's leading creditor nation after the war, its prosperity rippled across the globe. European nations like Germany and Great Britain borrowed heavily from the U.S. to rebuild their shattered economies. It seemed like the party would never end. But here's the problem with a party built on borrowed money and speculation. It's fragile. Underneath the surface of the Roaring Twenties, major cracks were forming. Agriculture was one of the first sectors to feel the strain. During the war, farmers had ramped up production to feed the world. But afterward, with European farms back online, a massive surplus of agricultural goods flooded the market. Prices for crops like wheat and cotton plummeted. Farmers couldn't pay back their loans and many lost their land. This was a warning sign that the global economy wasn't as healthy as it looked. Then came the big one, the stock market crash of 1929 on October 29th. A day known as Black Tuesday, the U.S. stock market completely collapsed. Why? A toxic mix of factors? People were buying stocks on margin, which is basically borrowing money to buy more stocks. This created a speculative bubble. When confidence wavered, everyone rushed to sell at once and the bubble burst. Billions of dollars in wealth vanished overnight. This wasn't just an American problem. It was a global catastrophe. The U.S., in a panic, stopped lending money abroad and demanded repayment of its loans. American banks, which had invested heavily in Europe, started failing. This created a domino effect. Without American capital, European economies, especially Germany's, which was already burdened by war reparations from the Treaty of Versailles, went into a nosedive. Global trade screeched to a halt. Countries adopted protectionist policies like the infamous Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act in the U.S., which raised taxes on imported goods to insane levels. The idea was to protect domestic industries, but all it did was start a trade war. Everyone else raised their tariffs in retaliation, and international trade collapsed by over 60%. The world was now officially in the Great Depression. The human cost was immense. Unemployment skyrocketed. In the United States and Germany, it reached as high as 25 to 30%. People lost their homes, their savings, their dignity. You see those iconic photos of breadlines in shanty towns called Hoovervilles in the U.S.? That was the reality for millions. The Depression didn't just affect industrial nations. Colonies and countries that relied on exporting raw materials were also devastated. When factories in Europe and the U.S. shut down, the demand for rubber from Southeast Asia or copper from Chile disappeared. Prices for these commodities crashed, plunging these economies into poverty. So, how did governments respond to this unprecedented crisis? The initial reactions, based on classical liberal economic theory, were often to do very little. The idea was to let the market correct itself. But as the suffering deepened, it became clear that this wasn't working. This led to a major shift in economic thinking, championed by a British economist named John Maynard Keynes. Keynesian economics argued that in a depression, the government had to step in and spend money to stimulate the economy. Even if it meant going into debt, the government should fund public works projects to create jobs and increase demand. This would prime the pump and get the economy moving again. We see this theory put into practice in various ways around the world. In the United States, President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal was a prime example of Keynesian ideas. The New Deal was a massive series of programs and reforms. It included things like the Civilian Conservation Corps, which put young men to work in national parks, and the Tennessee Valley Authority, which built dams to provide electricity and prevent floods. The New Deal also created a social safety net with programs like Social Security and unemployment insurance to protect citizens from future economic downturns. The government was now taking direct responsibility for the social and economic welfare of its people. Other countries took different paths. In Britain and France, democratic governments also increased their role in the economy, implementing social welfare programs and nationalizing some industries. They tried to manage their economies through a mix of policies, but recovery was slow. Now let's turn to the more extreme responses. In totalitarian states like the Soviet Union, Italy, and Germany, the government took complete control of the economy. In the Soviet Union, Stalin was already implementing his 5-year plans. The state controlled all aspects of industry and agriculture with the goal of rapid industrialization. While the rest of the world was in depression, the Soviet Union was industrializing at a breakneck pace, though it came at a horrific human cost through forced labor and famine, especially in Ukraine. Because the Soviet economy was largely isolated, it was shielded from the initial shock of the Great Depression. In fascist states like Italy, under Mussolini, and Nazi Germany under Hitler, the state also directed the economy, but in a corporatist model. This wasn't full state ownership like in the USSR. Instead, the government worked closely with private corporations, directing them toward national goals, primarily rearmament and military buildup. Hitler's massive public works projects, like building the Autobahn and a huge rearmament program, effectively ended unemployment in Germany by the late 1930s. This economic success was a huge part of his popularity, but it was an economy geared entirely for war. So, to wrap it all up for your AP exam, what are the key takeaways? First, the interwar economy shows the dangers of an interconnected but unregulated global financial system. The prosperity of the 20s was built on a house of cards. Second, the Great Depression was a turning point. It discredited laissez-faire capitalism and led to a new consensus that governments have a crucial role to play in managing the economy and providing for their citizens. This led to the rise of the welfare state in many democracies. And third, the economic crisis created fertile ground for extremist ideologies. The desperation of the Great Depression helped bring fascist leaders to power in Italy and Germany, who promised to restore order and prosperity through authoritarian control. Their response to the economic crisis was to build war machines, which ultimately plunged the world into an even greater catastrophe. Understanding this economic story is essential to understanding the political and social turmoil of the 1930s and the origins of World War II. It's a powerful lesson in how economics and politics are deeply, deeply intertwined. Thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe for more AP World Review. Good luck with your studies.